And welcome back to another edition of Capital Connection. Fridays, we give you, the listener, direct connection. What's happening in Albany and Harrisburg with the experts on the issues at the state capitals. They are this week Dan Bartkowiak at the Pennsylvania Family Institute and Jason McGuire with New Yorkers for Constitutional Freedoms. Jason, we'll begin with you and the governor's apology press conference earlier this week. This, of course, having to do with the slew of harassment allegations he is facing. Your thoughts on what he said? Is it enough to assuage the angst in Albany these days?
Well, I wish we had the opportunity to show body language experts, on this kind of a radio program, because by the way the governor conducted himself in that press conference, he's very uncomfortable with where he's at right now. Mm-hmm. He's made some statements that do sound apologetic, but it reminds me of a child being caught with his hand in the cookie jar and being sorry for that moment, not for the action itself. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's enough. I think the investigation that the Attorney General is conducting is going to reveal some troubling things, and where it goes from there will ultimately be up to the governor and the people of the state of New York in 2022.
Yeah, a lot of victims' rights advocates are taking issue with him saying, I did not know what I was doing at the time was wrong. They did not respond graciously to that comment. Jason, this is happening at the height of budget negotiations, and while there's an ongoing nursing home scandal as well, is he becoming too much of a distraction with these budget negotiations going on?
Well, that's the challenge. I'm not sure how the governor really can do his job right now in the face of all of the allegations and the investigations that are swirling around him. What it will mean is you will have a weakened governor who's still very powerful in budget matters, but an emboldened progressive legislature, and that's going to be the challenge for New York, because you're going to have a legislature that will do a plethora of progressive value issues, and a governor who is weakened. It's going to be trouble for New York State.
Yeah, there's a nursing home crisis as well in Pennsylvania, Dan. More than half of all the COVID deaths in your state have happened at nursing homes. A lot of victims' families saying they're not getting straight answers from the governor here. The Attorney General shooting down a GOP proposal to look into COVID deaths at nursing homes. Explain the controversy, if you would.
Well, I think this week Governor Wolf, what he admitted, screams the need for an investigation. He was asked a series of questions about our nursing home policies by Dennis Owens. He's an anchor at ABC 27 News. And Governor Wolf claims he was just following the federal government, what they were telling him to do. But when you look at the federal guidance, it says nursing homes can accept a resident diagnosed with COVID-19, not must. And so many states did not follow that guidance. When Dennis Owens pressed Governor Wolf on that, his reply was, I just don't know. Yeah. That response underscores the need for this full investigation ASAP.
Yeah, and of course the scandal involving the former health secretary who took her mom out of a home right before that fire took off. We'll see where that goes. Today, the state legislature, Jason, is voting to rescind the pandemic powers of the governor. A lot of people say that this has a lot of bark, but no bite. Your thoughts?
Yeah, rough is what I say. I mean, that's, this is going to be a difficult one, because you're going to see the media in many circles are going to say that this curtails Cuomo's powers, those special pandemic powers he had. But it doesn't. This ultimately will lead to the expansion of those powers and the extension of them beyond that April deadline. So whereas we all thought that this would mean the end of these special powers, they're probably going to continue into the next fiscal year as well.
Yeah. Charter school reform this week. The governor saying, hey, this is for the good of taxpayers. He's reining in charter schools. A lot of school choice advocates say it's a not-so-subtle swipe at school choice. What are your thoughts?
Well, I would think many agree that if COVID has taught us one thing in regards to education, it's that parents need more educational options. So it's pretty tone deaf when you want to further limit those options right now, and frankly, by attacking charter schools. I mean, this past year, thousands of families have flocked to cyber charter schools. You have thousands of families on waiting lists in Philadelphia, Lehigh Valley, for getting into charter schools. Yet you have public school teacher unions that are partnering with Democratic Socialists of America and demanding, a slew of things and protesting in-person learning. So I frankly would say we need better leadership on education in Pennsylvania that recognizes the real problems that are facing kids and parents. and especially not limiting those options.
Yeah. Hey, if you're just joining us, this is Capital Connection. Every Friday during the noon report, we spotlight the weighty issues emanating from the state capitals in Harrisburg and Albany. Jason McGuire of New Yorkers for Constitutional Freedoms and Dan Bartkowiak at the Pennsylvania Family Institute joining us this week. I want to spend a couple minutes, guys, on some really important legislative items from Washington, H.R. 1 and H.R. 5. Let's start with H.R. 5, the so-called Equality Act, Jason. Tom Reed from the Southern Tier was one of just 3 Republicans to vote for that. John Katko of Central New York, Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania were the other 2. How will Reed's vote on the Equality Act affect his ability to mount an effective gubernatorial run should he go down that road?
Well, I think it's going to be devastating to that gubernatorial run that he apparently wants to do. Here's where it's going to be problematic. Remember that there will likely be a Republican primary for governor. And the primary voters of New York State generally are faith-based people that are aware of what is going on with the Equality Act, and they are troubled by Representative Reed's vote on that matter. So if there is a GOP primary, it will be very problematic for Representative Reed.
Yeah, and then there's H.R. 1. This is that sweeping new election reform bill which passed this week, Dan, with no Republican support. A lot of people fear this is going to lead to a federal takeover of elections. Democrats say it's necessary to get big money out of our politics. But in a state like yours, which featured so prominently in the 2020 election, Dan, what are your fears? I know it needs 60 votes in the Senate, so it appears unlikely this will pass. But what are your fears should this bill become law?
So H.R. 1 is a horrible bill. By nationalizing election law, it forces states like Pennsylvania to expand mail-in voting, to prevent ballot harvesting. Even beyond elections, it forces organizations, pro-life, pro-family organizations, to disclose personal information of their supporters. So it subjects people across Pennsylvania to harassment or intimidation. So H.R. 1, it's like 6 different bills lumped together into one 800-page conglomerate of just awful ideas that need to be stopped by the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, and voter ID laws gone. These independent redistricting commissions really takes the power away from the states. Jason, Legislative Day is your big fundraiser of the year, and it's always a privilege and an honor for us to be able to partner with you on that, to make that trip to Albany each year. But hasn't happened in a couple years. Last year, because of COVID, you had to shut it down. But this year, Legislative Day is going to look different as well. Explain what's going to be happening this year.
Yeah, it is going to be different, as you mentioned. Like so many things in our world that the pandemic has changed, we still don't have access to the state capitol. So really, we're looking at during the month of April, when the legislature comes back from the budget process, is when the legislative matters that we're concerned with, a lot of social issues, will come up. And so there will be days of action throughout the month of April that will be focused on what you can do to make a difference in defending the values that we all care about among state legislators. So watch emails for that. We'll be informing people about the days of action coming in the month of April.
And all of that will be on your website, which we will give in just a minute. But first, let's go to Dan one more time, talk about the COVID mitigation restrictions being lifted this week, the governor dropping the travel ban, opening things up ever so slightly. How much of his decision-making on this virus has to do with science, and how much is politics driving his decision-making?
Well, I think it's being very incrementally slow in the opening, and I think we need to point this week, it was found that Pennsylvania lost 500,000 jobs in 2020, and 500,000 jobs that were gone. And what's discouraging is hearing the Secretary of Labor say we don't know the reason why they were lost or if they're coming back. And so perhaps the biggest factor in all this has been Governor Wolf's shutdown orders, and especially since the top industry that's been hurt is the hospitality sector. So it certainly needs to show a continued working with the hospitality sector businesses in helping them to get back on their feet.
All right, and with that, we are out of time this week. But as we mentioned, if you have questions about the Legislative Day events going on this year in New York, Jason, where can they find more information?
AlbanyUpdate.com.
And stay informed on the issues in Pennsylvania as well. Dan, what's your website, sir?
PAFamily.org.